My family pretended I didn't exist for 8 years. They let me leave with 2 trash bags and a bus ticket I'd paid for myself, and not one of them looked out the window when I drove off. But everything shifted the night they walked through the glass doors of my architecture firm in downtown Portland, uninvited, during my company's 10th anniversary reception. My stepfather set a folder on the reception desk and told me I had until midnight to sign over 40% of my business, or he'd make sure the bank pulled my line of credit by Monday. What he didn't realize was that the man he kept name-dropping as his golfing buddy at the bank had been working for me for 3 years. My name is Rachel, and I'm 31. I own a design-build firm that handles mid-rise commercial projects across the Pacific Northwest. Before I tell you how that night ended, do me a favor and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw a hard line with people who share your blood but never earned your trust, hit that subscribe button, because I promise you, the way this unfolded is something you won't see coming. It was a Thursday in late September, and the rain had finally let up for the evening. Our office occupies the top 2 floors of a renovated brick building in the Pearl District, and that night the whole space glowed. We'd strung warm lights across the exposed beams, set out trays of food from a caterer I'd used for years, and invited clients, contractors, city planners, the people who'd helped me build something out of nothing. I was standing near the model display, talking with a developer about an affordable housing project we were breaking ground on in the spring, when my office manager touched my elbow and told me there were 4 people at the front desk asking for me by name. Her face told me everything before she said another word. She said one of them was getting loud. I walked toward the lobby, and the second I rounded the corner, my stomach dropped through the floor. There they were. My stepfather, Dennis, in a navy blazer that pulled tight across his shoulders, his jaw already set in that ugly, familiar way. My mother, Carol, half a step behind him, clutching her purse with both hands. My younger half-sister, Brittany, in a dress that probably cost more than my first month's rent ever did. And beside her, her husband, Tyler, scrolling on his phone like he'd been dragged somewhere beneath him. Seeing them all together in one place did something strange to my body. For a second, I wasn't 31 and standing in the firm I'd built. I was 23 again. It had been a cold March morning when Dennis stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom and told me my time under his roof was over. I'd refused to put my name on a second mortgage he wanted to take out against the house, money that was supposed to bankroll Brittany's wedding and the down payment on a condo for her and Tyler. I told him I didn't have the income to be liable for a loan that size, that if anything went wrong, it would destroy my credit before I'd even started a career. My mother stood in the kitchen and said nothing. Dennis told me that if I wasn't willing to act like family, I could go find out what the world looked like without one. I packed what I could into 2 garbage bags. My mother handed me a casserole dish she wanted back and told me to call when I calmed down. For 8 years, the silence held. No birthday calls. No checking whether I was eating, whether I was safe, whether I was even still alive. I sent 2 cards the first year. After that, I stopped. And somewhere in those 8 years, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I pushed all of that down, smoothed my expression into the calm I use with difficult clients, and walked up to the desk. Dennis didn't waste a breath on hello. "There she is," he said, loud enough that 2 of my clients glanced over. "We need to talk, and we need a private room, not out here with all these people gawking." "You don't have an appointment, Dennis," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "This is a private event. I'd appreciate it if you'd lower your voice." He laughed, that short bark of a laugh I used to flinch at. Then he reached into a leather satchel and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it on the marble counter with a slap that made my office manager jump. "Here's how this is going to go," he said. "You're going to sit down with me tonight, and you're going to sign over 40% ownership of this little operation to your sister. It's time you contributed something back to this family after everything we did for you. And before you get any ideas, I know Gerald over at the bank. We golf together every Saturday. You miss 1 signature on that line of credit, and I make 1 phone call, and Monday morning you're explaining to your contractors why payroll bounced. So don't test me." Before I could even react to the sheer nerve of it, Brittany stepped forward, looking around my lobby with her nose wrinkled like she'd walked into a gas station bathroom. "I mean, it's cute," she said, gesturing vaguely at the brick and the lighting. A little rough around the edges, though. All this exposed industrial stuff felt fresh, 10 years ago? You'd think with all the money you supposedly make, you'd hire a real decorator. She let out a little laugh. I'm honestly surprised people pay for this. Her husband, Tyler, drifted up beside her and put a hand on her lower back, the kind of gesture that's supposed to look protective but mostly looks rehearsed. He gave me a smile I think he believed was charming. Hey, Rachel, he said, sliding into a tone like we were old friends. Look, nobody wants this to be tense. We're family. The thing is, you've clearly got a nice little business here, but you're leaving so much on the table. Real growth needs capital, needs strategy. I've scaled 3 companies. If you bring me on, I can restructure your operations, renegotiate your vendor contracts, get you margins you've never even dreamed of. You stick to the design stuff, the artsy part, and let me handle the actual business. I looked at him while he talked. He was wearing a watch that probably cost $5,000, but the heel of his right shoe was worn down to the leather, and the strap of his bag had been repaired with a strip of black tape. In construction, in design, you learn to read a job site before anyone opens their mouth. You learn that the people who talk loudest about money are usually the ones who don't have it. I'd seen Tyler's name 2 weeks earlier in a trade newsletter attached to a logistics startup that had laid off most of its staff and gone quiet on its investors. The watch and the smile were a paint job over rotted framing. My mother chose that moment to step out from behind Dennis. Sweetheart, she said softly, and the word landed like a slap. Please. Your father is offering you a chance here. We can all be a family again. Brittany and Tyler are expecting. Did you know that? Your first niece. Don't you want to be part of that? Don't burn this down out of stubbornness. I almost admired it, the choreography of it. They'd come to take nearly half of what I'd spent a decade building, and they'd wrapped it in a baby and the word family and a casserole dish from 8 years ago. Dennis tapped the folder. Well, what's it gonna be? You sign tonight, or I call Gerald in the morning. My office manager had her phone half out watching me, ready to call security or the police the moment I gave the word. And I'll be honest, every reasonable part of me wanted to have them walked out the front door and onto the wet sidewalk where they'd left me standing 8 years ago. But standing there, looking at their faces, all that hunger dressed up as concern, I realized that throwing them out would be too quick, too clean. They'd just drive home telling themselves I was bitter and unhinged. They needed to sit in the consequences of what they'd done. They needed to feel the floor disappear the way I once felt it disappear under me. So I let out a slow breath and reached over and gently pushed my office manager's hand down, away from the phone. That's not necessary, I said. I turned to her and smiled. Dina, will you set up the private conference room on the south side? Bring our guests something to drink? We've got a lot to talk about. I watched the change come over them as Dina led them down the hall. Dennis straightened up, walking like he'd just won something. Brittany trailed her fingers along the wall like she was already measuring it for renovations. Tyler murmured something to her about equity positions and exit strategy. They had no idea that every minute they spent in that room comfortable and confident was a minute they were walking deeper into a corner they'd never get out of. The South Conference Room is the nicest space in the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city, a long walnut table, soft lighting, the kind of room where I close the deals that keep the lights on. They settled into the leather chairs like they owned the place. Dennis tossed his satchel onto an empty seat and slapped the folder down in the center of the table, right next to a glass vase of white peonies. My mother started in before the door had even finished closing. "Oh, Rachel," she breathed, reaching across the table for my hand. I slid it back and busied myself straightening a coaster. Her face crumpled right on cue, and she pressed a tissue to the corner of one perfectly dry eye. "You have no idea how hard these years have been on me. A mother shouldn't have to go so long without her daughter. It's been agony. Agony." That was a remarkable word for a woman who hadn't dialed my number once in 8 years. "We don't even care about the money, honey," she went on, her voice catching in all the practiced places. "This paperwork is just a formality. It's just a way to make sure we stay connected, that we never drift apart again. We want to help you. We want to be part of what you've built." I didn't say a word. I picked up the pitcher of ice water from the credenza and walked slowly around the table, filling each of their glasses myself. Brittany peered into hers and pushed it away. "Tap water? Seriously? We're about to be business partners and you're serving us tap water out of a pitcher." She rolled her eyes. "Is this how you treat people you're trying to impress?" Dennis slammed his palm flat on the table, rattling the glasses. "We're not here for water," he barked. "Bring out something decent." "You've got a bar back there, I saw it. Bring us a real bottle of wine, the good stuff, not whatever box wine you stock for your little parties." "We have a Willamette Valley Pinot in the cellar," I said evenly. "Reserve. It runs about $200 a bottle. Would that suit you?" Dennis waved a hand like he was shooing a fly. "Fine, bring two." "An excellent choice," I said, and I meant it in a way none of them caught. "I'll have someone bring it right up. Make yourselves comfortable." I stepped out, and as the door swung shut, I heard Tyler laughing, telling Dennis how easy it was going to be to trim the fat off my staff once they had control. They genuinely believed they were running up a tab on my dime, a free dinner, and a free bottle and a free company. They didn't understand that I'd already opened a billing folder for them under my own authorization. Every glass of wine, every bite of the plate I was about to send in, was being logged against a number that was going to leave a mark. When I came back, one of my designers, a kid named Marcus who I'd hired straight out of school, was standing frozen by the door while Brittany waved the catering menu in his face. "I don't do gluten, dairy, or anything with industrial seed oils," she was saying. "I want the salmon, but I want it wild caught, and I want it pan-seared in clarified butter, not whatever you people use, and a side of asparagus, peeled, every stalk. I'll know if you skip it." Marcus looked at me, panic all over his face. None of that was on the menu, and peeling asparagus stalk by stalk in the middle of a catered event was a power move and nothing else. I took the menu from him and nodded toward the door. He left, grateful. "The off-menu salmon will be an additional charge," I said, deadpan. "Around $60 a plate, given the substitutions." Brittany waved her hand. "Put it on the house tab." My mother piped up next, wanting a fillet, medium rare, but sent back immediately if she saw even a drop of pink. Tyler asked for a seafood tower and a side of lobster mac, snapping his fingers at me like I was a server he was annoyed with. I wrote it all down without a flicker. The number in my head was already past $800 and the wine hadn't even arrived. Dennis was getting impatient. He smacked his hand on the folder. "Enough about the food, Rachel. I didn't drive down here to watch you play hostess. Get me a pen and sign this. You should be grateful I'm even offering. My insurance agency just had its best year on record. We're flush. Putting my name behind this place is the best thing that could happen to you. You need real backing to survive in this market, and I'm handing it to you." I studied him. He said the agency was thriving, but there was a vein standing out on his temple, and a sheen of sweat on his upper lip, and his fingers were drumming the table in a fast, jittery rhythm. A man swimming in money doesn't ambush his estranged stepdaughter at her own event and demand a signature by midnight. He was scared. The bluster was a tarp thrown over something that had already collapsed underneath. The wine arrived, and Dennis didn't so much as sniff it before he knocked back the taster pour and ordered the rest poured around. He fixed me with that look I remembered from childhood, the one meant to make me small. "Don't think you can stall me with fancy wine. I want your name on that line before the food comes out." Tyler leaned in, eager to ride his momentum. "Exactly. It's all about timing, Rachel. My company's about to close a major round. We just need to move some assets around to bridge a short-term liquidity thing this quarter. Once we fold our portfolios together, I can cover the gap and we optimize you at the same time. Everybody wins." The room went dead quiet. Brittany's head snapped around toward her husband, her eyes wide. "Tyler," she hissed to her teeth, the polish cracking off her voice all at once. "Shut up. We don't talk about that here." Tyler blinked, realizing what had just come out of his mouth. "A short-term liquidity thing. That's the language people use when they can't make payroll and can't say so out loud. They weren't here to invest in me. They were a ship taking on water, and they decided I was the bucket." I let the silence stretch. Then I set both palms flat on the table and leaned in. Before we talk about partnerships or liquidity or any of it, I said quietly, I have one question. Where were all of you for the last 8 years? My mother's tears evaporated. She sat up straight and smoothed her skirt. What kind of question is that? We gave you space. You're the one who left. You were so angry back then, so unstable we didn't know how to reach you. We had to protect a family. I laughed, short and bitter. I didn't leave, Mom. Dennis put my things in trash bags and told me to get out. You stood in the kitchen and handed me a casserole dish and asked me to call when I calmed down. Nobody called the police to check on your unstable daughter. Nobody called my friends. You erased me the next morning like I'd never lived in that house. Dennis crossed his arms. You were being disrespectful. You needed to learn what loyalty meant. This was never about loyalty meant. This was never about loyalty, Dennis. My voice dropped. It was about the $22,000. The color drained out of my mother's face. It was about the savings bond in the account my grandfather left me, I went on. He set it up before he passed for my college. It matured the year I turned 23, the same year you threw me out. Brittany's mouth fell open. Dennis's knuckles went white on the edge of the table. I hired a forensic accountant 3 years ago, I said, like I was reading off a weather report. I wanted to finally pull the money my grandfather left me and put it toward paying off my last business loan. Do you want to know what she found? She found that 4 days after you locked me out, Dennis, you used a power of attorney I never signed to drain that account down to 0. You took every cent. Tyler turned and stared at his father-in-law. Brittany had gone pale. And you want to know where it went? I looked at my sister. It went toward the deposit on a destination wedding in Cabo, ice sculptures and an open bar and a string quartet so Brittany could have her perfect day. You needed me gone and cut off so I'd never see the final account statement come in the mail. You didn't ghost me because I was difficult. You ghosted me to cover up a felony. My mother dropped her face into her hands and wailed. We were desperate, Rachel. The deposit was due. The venue was going to cancel. Your sister would have been humiliated. You weren't even using the money. I wasn't using it because I was working 2 jobs and living in a studio with a space heater, because the radiator didn't work, I said flatly. Dennis pounded the table. Enough of this ancient history. I housed you and fed you for 20 years. That money was the family's and I spent it as I saw fit. You owe us. Now pick up the pen and sign, or I call Gerald and you lose everything by Monday. He was still swinging at a wall that had already come down and he didn't even know it. Tyler raised both hands, going for peacemaker. Okay, let's all just dial it down. Rachel, you're getting emotional, and I get it. This is personal for you. But business is objective. It's structure, equity, asset management. You can't let old family stuff cloud a deal this good. With respect, you don't have the background to see the full picture here. I turned to him slowly. I don't have the background, I repeated. Tell me, Tyler, which part am I missing? Is it the part where you took a bridge loan at 14 to cover your monthly burn rate? Or the part where your investors stopped returning your calls in July? Because I read the same trade publications you pitched to. And last week I read that a certain logistics startup quietly filed for Chapter 7 9 days ago. The smile slid right off his face. Chapter 7? Brittany's voice cracked across the room. Tyler, what is she talking about? You said you were pivoting. You said the new money was wiring in. Tyler wouldn't look at her. Sweat ran down into that taped-up collar. Fouet ran down into that taped-up collar. Pivoting is a polite word for shutting the doors, I said. So please tell me again how I'm too emotional to understand asset management. Tell me how handing 40% of my debt-free company to a man who just liquidated his own is a smart move for me. I let that hang. Then I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and took out a single folded sheet of paper. I set it on the table next to Dennis's untouched contract and slid it toward him with 2 fingers. Now, I said, about that phone call to Gerald. Dennis frowned at the paper. He unfolded it. I watched his eyes move across the lines, watched them stop, watched them go back to the top and read it again. This building, I said, the one you walked into tonight, 11 floors, the whole block. I bought the holding company that owns it 4 years ago. Gerald, your Saturday golf buddy, the man you'd keep threatening me with, has been the property manager for my real estate arm since before he ever shook your hand on a tee box. He doesn't approve my line of credit, Dennis. He reports to me. Every Saturday, when you're bragging to him about your successful family, he's been signing off on my acquisitions. The room was so quiet I could hear the rain starting up again against the windows. And the condo you live in, I went on, turning to my mother, the one on Burnside that Dennis refinanced last year. I'd have to check the file to be sure, but I believe the note on that building is held by one of my partners. Funny how small the world gets when you start paying attention to who owns what. Dennis's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. You came here tonight to evict me from my own life, I said, and it turns out I'm the one holding the lease on yours. I stood up. I picked up the contract he brought, the one demanding 40% of everything I'd bled for, and I tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall onto the table next to the peonies. The wine and the food come to about $1,400, I said. Dina will bring you the check on your way out. And it's not on the house. You've eaten enough on my dime to last a lifetime. Brittany was crying now, real tears, ugly ones, turned on her husband. Tyler was staring at the table. My mother kept saying my name like it was a question. Dennis sat there gray-faced, finally understanding that the daughter he'd thrown into the cold had not only survived the winter, she'd bought the whole street. I walked to the door and held it open. You should go, I said. My guests are waiting, and I have a company to celebrate. I won't pretend it didn't cost me something to watch them shuffle out past my clients, past the warm lights, and the model of the housing project that was going to put roofs over a few hundred families who'd never thrown anyone into the snow. My mother paused at the door like she expected one last softening from me. I didn't give it to her. People will tell you that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that you have to forgive, that holding a line makes you the cold one. I used to believe that, back when I was 23 and crying on a curb with 2 trash bags. But I've learned that forgiveness without accountability is just an open door for the same people to walk through and take from you again. I didn't owe my stepfather a piece of my company because he'd housed me. I didn't owe my sister my savings so she could play princess for a weekend. And I didn't owe my mother a tearful reunion because she finally got around to missing me when the bank accounts ran dry. Drawing a boundary isn't cruelty. It's the thing that lets you keep breathing. They tried to bury me on that cold March morning, and the only thing they got wrong was assuming that what they were burying wouldn't grow. If you've ever had to walk away from people who shared your name but never had your back, tell me about it below. And remember, the life you build without them is the only answer you'll ever owe. I think about that cold March morning more than I'd like to admit. The 2 trash bags, the casserole dish my mother handed me like it mattered more than I did. For a long time I believed that mourning was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now, I understand it was the foundation everything else got built on. Dennis didn't ruin my life when he locked that door. He just stopped pretending he'd ever been on my side. And a person who knows exactly where they stand can finally start walking. What happened in that conference room wasn't luck, and it wasn't revenge falling out of the sky. Every piece of it traced back to a choice. Dennis chose to drain my grandfather's account and gamble that I'd never look. Tyler chose to wear a $5,000 watch over a company he couldn't keep alive. Brittany chose to mistake a wedding for a life. And when people build their whole identity on what they can take from others, the bill always comes due, usually at the worst possible moment for them, and the best one for everybody they stepped on. I didn't have to do anything cruel that night. I just had to be standing there when their choices caught up with them. But I want to be honest about my own part, because the satisfaction in that room didn't come from being right. It came from the 8 years in between. The years of 2 jobs and a broken radiator. The year I taught myself to read a balance sheet at a kitchen table because I couldn't afford to hire anyone who could. The forensic accountant I saved up to hire, not to get even, but because I refused to keep wondering. Refusing to look away from an ugly truth is its own kind of strength, and so is the patience to wait 3 years for the full picture instead of grabbing at the first chance to lash out. If there's anything I'd want you to carry out of my story, it's this. Don't let the people who undervalue you set the price on your future. Build your competence quietly until you understand the rooms you walk into better than the loudest person in them. Hold your line even when everyone tells you that holding it makes you the cold one, because a boundary you actually enforce is worth more than 100 you only talk about. And keep your own conduct clean, not for them, but for the person you have to be when the lights go down at night. The reason I could tear up that contract without flinching is that I never had to wonder whether I'd done anything to be ashamed of. They tried to bury me. They forgot that the thing they were shoving into the dark already knew how to grow toward light.